Welcome everyone. My name is Nikos, aka Sephir, and this is Out of the Box, EDH. In tonight's game, we have Mike at the top left, playing his Jenny Flint and Madame Vastra pair. His deck is focused in clue creation and payoffs. At the top right, I am playing my Atogatog deck. This is a deck built with cards only from the Invasion block, the Odyssey block, and the 7th edition core set, and there is also a small tribal hate theme in it. At the bottom right, we have Kiwi, playing his Oviya list. This deck is focused in artifact token creation, with artifact copying and sacrificing shenanigans. Finally, at the bottom left, we have Watchwolf, and his Tovolar Wolf Tribal. His deck wants to put as many wolves and werewolves on the field as possible, turn them sideways, and capitalize on his commander's card draw ability. Without further ado, let's move to our game. Mike plays a Temple of Mystery as his land for turn, scries one, keeps it on top, and passes the turn to me. I play a Brassland as my land for turn. I pay one and I play a Devoted Caretaker. I pass the turn to Kiwi afterwards. Kiwi plays a Forest, casts his commander Oviya Pashiri, and passes. Watchwolf plays a Wooded Foothills. He immediately sacrifices it for a Cinder Glade, and he passes the turn after that. Mike plays a Copperline Gorge. He casts a Talisman of Curiosity and passes. I play a Sangras Prairie. I cast a Fertile Ground on my Brassland, and I pass the turn to Kiwi. Kiwi plays the Sire, and then he casts a Gourmand's Talent. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with his commander. Mike takes the 1 damage, and then Kiwi passes the turn. Watchwolf plays a Forest as his land for turn, and then he casts a Farseek. He searches for a Stomping Ground, and then he passes. Mike plays a Flooded Grove. Then he casts a Sol Ring, and then he casts a Carvanista, Loyal Lupari. He attacks Kiwi for 5 damage, and he passes the turn after that. I play an Darker Wastes as my land for turn. Then, with 3 mana, I cast a Wild Research. I pass the turn to Kiwi after that. Kiwi plays a Forest. With 3 mana, he casts Peregrine Took, and then he moves to combat. He attacks Watchwolf with his commander with 1 damage. He passes the turn after that. Watchwolf plays a Forest as his land for turn, and with 2 mana, he casts a Mayor of Avabrook, and then, with another 2 mana, he casts a Pestilent Wolf. Watchwolf politely asks us if we are willing to rule Zero Mayor's transform ability into the same day-night mechanic Tovolar uses, so you won't have to track basically 2 different day-night mechanics. I'm a monster and I politely decline. He passes the turn afterwards. Mike plays an Alchemist's Refuge as his land for turn. Then he casts commander, Jenny Flint, and a cameo of Whispered Hope. He moves to combat and attacks me with Carnavista. Carnavista triggers, putting a +1/+1 counter on Jenny Flint. I take the damage, and he passes the turn afterwards. With 2 mana, I activate Wild Research to search my library for an unnatural selection. I discard 1 card at random from my hand, and it is an Undermine. I play a Sulphurous Springs as my land for turn. I cast the unnatural selection that I tutored for, and I pass the turn to Kiwi afterwards. Kiwi plays a Teething Wurmlet and a Darksteel Citadel as his land for turn, which triggers the Wurmlet for a +1/+1 counter and 1 life. He passes the turn afterwards. Watchwolf plays his commander, Tovolar, Dire Overlord. He immediately goes to combat and attacks me with his Pestilent Wolf. I decide to not change its creature type and allow him to hit me, so he will draw a card. After that, he passes the turn to Mike, missing his land drop. Mike plays a Jolrael, Moonfully Recluse. He then casts a Heaven Sent, creating a clue. He moves to combat, attacking Kiwi with Jenny Flint and Watchwolf with Carnavista. Kiwi responds by creating a servo with his commander, also creating a food from Peregrine Took, also triggering the Wurmlet for a +1/+1 counter and 2 life. He then jump blocks Jenny Flint with his servo. Jenny Flint also got 2 +1/+1 counters from his own training ability and Carnavista's attack trigger. Mike sacrifices a clue which triggers Jenny Flint and puts a +1/+1 counter on Kami. He draws a card which creates a 2/2 cat with Jolrael. He plays a Path of Ancestry as his land for turn, and then he passes the turn. I cast a Harrow, sacrificing a forest, and I search for a swamp and an island, and put them into play untapped. Then, with 3 mana, I cast a Pure Reflection. I pass the turn to Kiwi afterwards. Kiwi levels up his gourmand talent, and then he casts a Ser Ginger. This triggers Pure Reflection, and he creates a reflection token, destroying all other reflections in play. In response to that trigger, I target Carnavista with a natural selection and change its creature type to Reflection. Mike responds with a Snakeskin Veil, but I just retarget Carnavista with a natural selection. Carnavista is destroyed and Kiwi gets his Reflection token. He also creates a food with Peregrine Took, which triggers the Wurmlet for 1 life and a +1/+1 counter, which triggers the talent for a Raccoon token and an extra food from Peregrine Took, and 1 extra life from the Wurmlet. He passes the turn after that. In Watchwolf's upkeep, it becomes night, and all his werewolves transform thanks to Tovolar's ability. He moves to combat and swings everything at Mike. Mike doesn't block and takes the full swing for 11 damage. Watchwolf draws 3 cards from Tovolar's ability. He casts a Young Wolf, and more importantly, an Immerwolf, which makes tracking day and night redundant for the rest of the game. Thank God. At the end of his turn, Howlpack Alpha creates a 2/2 Wolf token, and Watchwolf passes. Heaven Sent creates a clue. Mike casts his other commander, Madame Vastra. He scries 1 from the Path of Ancestry, and chooses to put the card to the bottom of his library. He creates a Reflection token, destroying all other reflections. He sacrifices a clue that triggers Jenny Flint, that puts a +1/+1 counter on the Kami. He draws a card, which triggers Jolrael, who puts a 2/2 cat token in play. He casts an Erdwall Illuminator, which creates another reflection token, destroying his previous one. He attacks me with Jenny Flint. I take the full 8 commander damage, and he passes the turn to me afterwards. I play a Shadowblood Ridge as my land for turn. I cast a Chainer, Dementia Master. Mike is quick to counter him with a Confirm Suspicions. However, since Pure Reflection does not specify that the creature needs to be successfully cast for it to trigger, I turn his Kami into a Reflection with my Unnatural Selection. Then I create a Reflection token, destroying all other reflections. Chainer gets countered, and Mike gets 3 clues. I pass the turn to Kiwi after that. Kiwi plays a Power Depot as his land for turn. This triggers the Wurmlet, getting a +1/+1 counter and gaining a life, which triggers Gourmand's Talent, creating a Raccoon token, which triggers Peregrine Took, who creates a food, which triggers Finally Teething Wurmlet for a final 1 life. He moves to combat, attacking Mike with his Wurmlet. Mike jump blocks with one of his cats, and then Kiwi passes the turn afterwards. Watchwolf smells blood, and immediately goes to combat, attacking me with all of his creatures. I try to target Tovolar with my Unnatural Selection and turn him into a Reflection. Watchwolf, however, responds by casting a Nightpack Ambusher, buffing his army and, more importantly, creating a Reflection destroying my own. I block 1 creature with my Devoted Caretaker, but I still take 19 damage, dropping to 5 life and losing my creature, while Watchwolf draws another 3 cards from the Tovolar trigger. Then Watchwolf passes the turn, having missed his land drop for a 3rd turn in a row and discarding to hand size. At the beginning of Mike's upkeep, Kiwi uses Oviya Pashiri to create a servo, also creating a food from Peregrine Took, also triggering the Wurmlet for a +1/+1 counter and 2 life, which trigger the Gourmand Talent for an extra Raccoon, an extra food from Peregrine Took, and another 1 life from the Wurmlet. Heaven Sent moves to its last chapter, dealing 1 damage to everyone, and exiles itself. Then Mike recasts Heaven Sent and creates another clue. And another extra clue from the Illuminator. He sacrifices a clue that triggers Jenny Flint that puts a +1/+1 counter on Madame Vastra. He draws a card which triggers Jolrael, who puts a 2/2 cat token in play. He passes the turn after that. I play a Skycloud Expanse and cast my commander, Atogatog. With the Pure Reflection trigger on the stack, I turn Tovolar into a Reflection, and then I create a Reflection that destroys all other reflections. Finally, I cast a Spirit of Resistance, and then I pass the turn to Kiwi afterwards. At the end of my turn, Kiwi sacrifices a clue that triggers Ser Ginger, putting him a +1/+1 counter, scrying 1, and keeping it on top. He gains 3 life, triggering Gourmand's Talent, creating a Raccoon token, which triggers Peregrine Took, who replaces the sacrificed food, which triggers Teething Wurmlet, who gets a +1/+1 counter and gives Kiwi a life. After that, we finally move to Kiwi's turn. Kiwi sacrifices 3 clues with Peregrine Took to draw a card. This triggers Sir Ginger for 3 +1/+1 counters, scrying 1, keeping the card on top, and then drawing it. Kiwi casts an Arcbound Ravager. He creates a reflection token that destroys all other reflections. It triggers Peregrine Took, who creates a food, which triggers the Wurmlet for a +1/+1 counter and 1 life. This triggers the Gourmand's Talent, creating a Raccoon token, which triggers Peregrine Took for another food, which triggers the Wurmlet for another 1 life. Ravager comes into play, which triggers the Wurmlet for a final 1 life, and Kiwi passes the turn. Watchwolf casts a Domri, Anarch of Bolas. He chooses to minus Domri and have his young wolf fight my Atogatog. Both creatures die, but young wolf comes back into play because of his undying. He moves to combat. He attacks me with one of his wolf tokens and the rest of his creatures to Kiwi. Without any black permanents, Spirit of Resistance cannot save me, and I die from a wolf attack. Kiwi, however, is able to block everything with his illusion token and his raccoon army. Kiwi loses all his raccoons and his illusion, while Watchwolf loses the Pestilent Wolf. At the end of his turn, Howlpack Alpha creates another 2/2 wolf token. Kiwi also sacrifices a clue, which triggers Sir Ginger, putting him a +1/+1 counter, scrying 1 and keeping it on top. He gains 3 life, triggering Gourmand's Talent, creating a Raccoon token, which triggers Peregrine Took, who replaces the sacrificed food, which triggers Teething Wurmlet, who gets a +1/+1 and gives Kiwi a life. The turn then passes to Mike. Heaven Shed goes to Chapter 2. Mike creates 1 clue from the saga and 1 from the Illuminator. He cycles a Tranquil Thicket, drawing a card and triggering Jolrael for 1 extra 2/2 cat token. He plays a mountain as his land and then he passes the turn. At the end of his turn, Kiwi sacrifices a clue, which triggers Sir Ginger, putting him a +1/+1 counter, scrying 1 and keeping it on top. He gains 3 life, triggering Gourmand's Talent, creating a Raccoon token, which triggers Peregrine Took, who replaces the sacrificed food, which triggers Teething Wurmlet, who gives Kiwi an extra life. We move to Kiwi's turn after that. Kiwi casts a Nexus of Becoming. This triggers the Wurmlet, getting a +1/+1 counter and gaining a life. This triggers Gourmand's Talent, creating a Raccoon token, which triggers Peregrine Took, who creates a food, which triggers Teething Wurmlet, who gives Kiwi another life. He moves to combat, drawing a card from the Nexus. Then, he exiles from his hand an Iktekik. An artifact copy of Iktekik enters play, and also a 3/3 golem. These both trigger Peregrine Took, who creates another 2 foods. They all trigger the Wurmlet for 4 life. After that, he passes the turn to Watchwolf. Watchwolf plays a Scourge Wolf, and then he immediately moves to combat, attacking Kiwi with everything. Kiwi blocks everything, but Watchwolf responds with a Howlpack Resurgence that buffs his army and, more importantly, gives them Trample. Ambusher and Howlpack die, Kiwi takes 14 damage, and then Watchwolf passes the turn to Mike. At the end of Watchwolf's turn, Mike uses the Alchemist's Refuge to give flash to all his stuff. He casts a Mechanized Production in a clue. No one has any responses, and when his turn comes, the Mechanized Production creates an 8th clue and gives Mike the win. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.